Hi, everyone. I'm Ruth Carpenter. I'm a digital scholarship librarian here. I work through the Digital Scholarship Center. A lot of what we do on campus is support for graduate, undergraduate, and faculty research that are doing kind of digital projects. So that's anywhere from kind of basic web design to we help out with some kind of basic data analysis tools and methods as well. Tonight I'm here to talk about Twine, which is a really nice interactive fiction tool for creating kind of narrative-based games. Has anyone heard of Twine before? No. Okay, cool. No worries, because we're gonna be learning it tonight. So like I said, it's a tool that lets users create or write choice-based fiction. If you've ever read like a choose your own adventure novel, or anything kind of like that, where you get to the end of the page and it's like, if you want to do this, go here. If you want to do this, go here. That's what we're talking about, except it works based on hyperlinks. So you click on links and then you go to different parts of the story. So there are lots of examples of Twine games that I've shared here. Since we've not heard of Twine before, and since maybe we've also not heard of interactive fiction or even know what kind of narrative games might look like, maybe just take a couple of minutes to explore one of these just to get the sense of what's involved before we just go into the tool and start writing things. So there are lots of different kind of genres within narrative fiction, and it's not always just like text-based. There are usually some kind of puzzle involved. Sometimes it's time-based, sometimes it's kind of inventory-based. There are lots of different things that you can kind of do with it beyond just writing narrative, although it's certainly possible to write an interesting game that is just purely kind of text. Just to give an idea of how you might plan out one of these games, because when we're talking about text-based games, they can get unwieldy quick because you think, well, I'll just like write. And then once you go to play through, you realize there are lots of passages that don't actually sync together. Things happen in one branch of the story that you want to connect to another branch of the story, but you haven't kind of planned ahead of how that's going to work. And there are lots of things that you can do programmatically to just kind of force things to work, but it does also help if you plan a little bit ahead of time through your narrative, how things are going to sync back up together if that's your plan. So these are different kind of maps that you can kind of come back to and refer to of how you might plan out a interactive fiction story. So the first one is a time cave. This is kind of the easiest one to achieve. It's like every decision leads to 2 more decisions, and then that decision leads to 2 more decisions. And then at the end, you have an array of different endings. Some are good, some are bad, but the story never really folds back in on itself at any point. Gauntlet style is sort of next easiest in terms of kind of planning. There's one straight spine of your story. So there's one main narrative line that might happen. And then there are little dead ends that might occur as you go through. So you make a wrong choice and then you're at a dead end, but it's easy enough to kind of just start over and try and go through the gauntlet again. And then at the end, there's usually just like one main good ending that you're trying to achieve. That is what you win by going through the gauntlet. Branch and bottleneck are stories that come together at certain main points of a story. So if you think of adventure stories where you can either go to a forest or you can go to a cave, but then you meet up at a tavern after that kind of adventure, that's a branch and bottleneck. So you have little side quests that you can go on, but you come back and the story converges at one point. And usually a branch and bottleneck will have at least 2 of those kinds of moments that happen within the story. And then at the end, you can have one passage, but different endings if you've set up kind of different variables that players or inventory items, variables that players might encounter and pick up. And then you can make that matter. It can adjust kind of what the ending is, or if they've explored one part of the story and not another part of the story, you can make it so they get one ending as opposed to another ending, right? So you can personalize the story. Quest stories are, you make a decision, you kind of fumble around in a bunch of different kind of areas or passages, and then it leads you to the next part of the story where you fumble around, and then it leads you to the next part of the story. So that's kind of a quest. There's not a lot of back and forth. It's still fairly linear, but the smaller parts of it are a little bit more open, right? You can travel between them. Open map stories are probably the lightest narratively because they work best when you're just kind of a player who's exploring an area. And there are things to find out and to find within that area, but narratively they're pretty sparse because each of these passages are nominally all attached to each other. So narratively that can be a mess to keep track of. Because you don't want to have to be like, well, have they gone? If you like, a lot of these are kind of, you're either exploring a haunted house, you're exploring a castle, something like that. So you don't want to be doing a bunch of checks to see where they've been, like where your player has been, but like if they've picked up a certain item or if they've already solved a certain puzzle within the area, maybe that gives them access to something else or a different passage when they revisit a passage they've already been to. So narratively, these work best when the narrative is a little bit lighter and there's some kind of particular place that the player is in exploring. Loop and grow stories work by there's a certain number of actions in a set kind of pattern that players need to do, and they need to do it so many times before they get access to the next part of the story. So you can think of it like if you're writing sort of a slice of life story, players need to do their chores before they can go outside and do something fun. And then the next day, again, they have to kind of do their chores before they can go out and do something fun. And then usually what happens within these stories is something disrupts that motion that makes it interesting. Or players are enticed outside of that pattern for some reason, for something interesting to happen. So these are just nice to keep in mind, especially if you're new to writing interactive fiction, what kind of structures exist that you might play around with, emulating. If you're new to this, sometimes I recommend, once we're in Twine, just like putting the passages in sort of the same place that they are in these images and trying to get them to link up, because that's a really easy way of kind of practicing getting things to sync. And now we're just going to move into Twine. So Twinery, so Twine is based in your browser, so you can just use it in your browser. You don't need to sign up for an account, or you can download it if you would like to. And it supports Windows, Mac, and Linux. It is free and it is open source. There are multiple libraries within Twine, so there are different ways of building stories. The default is Harlow. That's what we're using tonight. But if you've got some kind of JavaScript chops and things like that, there are other libraries that you might actually prefer using. So SugarCube is one of them, particularly that might be of interest. So just check those out after tonight and see kind of what their documentation leads you to. But speaking of, so Twinery runs on its own kind of syntax, because of course it does. I want the cookbook. So we have the Harlow manual. This is the particular library that we're working in tonight. And we have the Twine cookbook. And you'll see over here, if I go to Twine 2 examples, let's go to just date and time. It'll give us different selections based on the library that we're working with. So there's Chapbook, Harlow, Sugar Cube, and Snowman. So Sugar Cube or Snowman are probably of interest because those are kind of the most customizable and robust still at this point. Harlow's kind of the default one. But Twine works on its own kind of syntax. If you've ever worked with wiki type syntax, is similar to that, especially early wiki syntax. We're going to be getting into that. So I'm going to be going over a lot of kind of the basic actions, but if you're interested in learning more, and learning more of like the macros, which really just is what lets you add a lot of capability to stories, check out these documentations. Let's get into Twine. So when you first open Twine, it's going to lead you to a space like this. So this is where your stories are kept. So each of these are 2 stories. To create a new story, you just go to +new and then title it. And this is what you're going to be led to. So it doesn't do a lot to help you out, right? It's a blank page that you will be starting with. This rocket ship right here, this just means that when someone goes to play your game or when you go to test your game, this is the passage that you're going to start in. So that's important to keep in mind. If you start writing this, but then you create like a title page or something else afterwards, just make sure that you move this rocket ship. Things that are important to note just within this kind of working area. Your edit button will let you edit the passages that you have selected. Your rename button will rename passages. Your test from here is going to open up your story in debug mode, so you can debug. Will let you go to a certain passage, or you could select all, which is very nice for when you need to move all of your passages around. You can zoom in or out if you've got a very large story. And yeah, that's kind of it. If you go to story, build, and Twine, you get kind of different tools, but those are the basics. I'm going to actually double click into this untitled passage. You can also rename this here. I usually just always start with a start. And then you just start writing. So with Twine and when teaching, I usually start with some kind of place that players might be exploring. So someone give me a place. Dungeon. I'll also say Twinery does not have a spell checker built in.
Does external, grammar checks work on this?
As far as like, if you have an extension in your browser, I don't know. I've not used like Grammarly because I find that it interrupts me more than I really want it to. Right. So I don't know if Grammarly works in here. It probably would be my guess. So let's make this a little bit more narrative, right? So what are 3 things that exist in a dungeon that you might want to check out?
Base.
Oh,
A base.
A base.
Cool. A door. And then chest.
Okay, so those are three things that we could check out. We can make these into passages just by adding brackets. So double brackets around the thing that you want to be a link is the syntax. So say we just want door in front of you and a chest you could open. Right? And Twine is automatically going to create those passages for us. And then that's where we can start to add to our story. We can also say we want kind of, I don't really like any of these options, right? So we could say, maybe we want to go back outside. And maybe there's a passage. We want to say go back outside. That's the link that our text should be for our user to click. But because we don't want to keep track of these very long passage names, we want to start to create kind of a shorthand. So we're going to say outside, and there's a pipe in between these. And what this is going to do is create a passage that's called outside. But this text, go back outside, is what's going to appear to our player and is going to be clickable. So we could do this here as well. So we could change this to base. We could change this to door, and we could change this to chest. That makes your writing a lot easier because then if you ever want to refer to any of these passages, you're doing a lot less typing, right? Because you're just writing the one word. Passage names are case sensitive. They are white space sensitive as well. So make sure you don't have any hanging white spaces anywhere within them. So there are our three, well, we have four, right? Passages. From here, we could click on this, go to chest. So what would we find in the chest that might help us later in the dungeon?
Okay.
You find a key, right? And then once we find the key, we want to go back to where we were. So we can write go back, we can write our pipe, and then we hit start or double bracket, and we're going to get double arrows here now, because now you can go back and forth between these passages. So that's something to keep track of if you need to go back and forth between places, or if you're kind of debugging this and you don't know why you can't access a certain passage, checking how they're actually linked and fixing something. Because if you've had to go back in and change passage names or anything like that, something might have just got broken along the way. Okay, so we find a key, which is great, but we also want to keep track that we found a key. So we want to create a variable, which is key. So the way the syntax for that in Twine is to set, and then variable names have the cache symbol in front of them. And we're going to set key to, and we could do this a number of ways. We could do we could just do like a Boolean, true, false. We could set it to a particular text, either found, not found. If we want to find a particular kind of key, we could say shiny key or whatever, right? And then we have access to different doors, maybe depending on the exact kind of key that we found. I can make this a lot bigger too. Or we could also just set it to a number, right? So set key to 1 if we're just trying to find as many keys as possible. It depends on the story that you're writing and kind of what your end goal is. So for now, we're just going to set key to true. And we're going to end that with a parenthesis. Okay, now let's go to door, because that's where we might put a key in if we have one. But now we need to kind of address the fact that we might be coming across this passage, having found a key and also having not found a key. So we are going to be writing an if statement. Have we coded? I assumed that we had coded before in this room, but are there people who haven't coded before? No. Okay. So variable, new concept. A little bit. Okay. So variables are just things that lets us keep track of the state of our game. They're particular objects that have a particular argument attached to them. So key has the argument true attached to it. If we haven't come across that yet, it's automatically set to false within sort of the game logic. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create an if statement. So an if statement for programming is a particular kind of statement that checks the state of your kind of arguments of what you're looking for. So we're going to create an if statement that checks to see if the key is true or false. That's a Boolean. That's kind of what Boolean means. And we're going to display a certain text to our players and an option to our players, depending on if that's true or not. So we are going to start with our if statement. So all arguments in Twinery begin with a parenthesis. So if, we're going to reference our key variable. Again, case sensitive. The usual variable naming rules apply, don't have numbers, don't have special characters, all that kind of stuff apply. So if key, and then we use the is word, so we're not doing equal signs, it's is. So if key is true, and then we end our parenthesis, and we're gonna create a hook here. And a hook just means a passage that is attached to a certain argument. So that's going to be what is in between these straight brackets. So if key is true, we're going to display this text. So that might be as simple as the door you can use your key to open the door. Right? And now if we're doing this here, we can nest a passage, a link to a passage within here. And we could put this to secret room. Right? And that's going to create a new passage called secret room that we're only going to have access to if the key is true. If we have found the key, we can open it. So here we're going to add also an else statement, which is going to take care of if key is not true. Right, which we can add kind of whatever we want to. So there's a large door, it is heavy and locked. You can do else if statements just like you can elsewhere. So if you've got a set of things that you want to kind of test out variable wise, just to check game states, you can do that. And then else is just your catch-all at the end.
Could you zoom in?
Yes.
So would you say if key is false, or would you just use else?
You just use else in this scenario, right? Because there's only two states.
Okay.
So that's it. So syntax wise, arguments, parentheses, macro name, colon, and then passage text is always between brackets. And then new passages have double brackets. And then the bar is the pipe is used to separate. Okay, let's test this game. Oh, well, actually, at the end of this else statement, we're probably gonna want to be able to go back, right? So let's write that in real quick. Before we test. Make sure that worked. Yep, we've got our double arrow. All right, we're gonna hit start. We're gonna test from here and we'll show what debug mode looks like. So this passage here, the black passage, white text, blue links, those are all the default settings. You can style Twine games. You can style them more if you're working in Sugar Cube than you can in Basic Harlow, but you can change all of these settings either through Twinery syntax, or you can create a CSS style sheet and use that. So let's click on this. So we go to our vase. There's nothing in our vase, so we don't get anything there. We go to our chest, we find a key. We can see down here in our little debug mode that we have a new variable, key, it is set to true. So if you're setting variables and you know you're in a passage where a variable should appear here and it doesn't, that means something is broken and you need to fix it. But right now everything is working. We can go back. And you'll see our variable persists, right? Which is good. And then we go to the door in front of us. We can use our key, we can open the door, and then we are in the secret room. If I refresh this, and then we go to the door without getting the key, we get this text instead, right? So everything is currently working. So as you are in Twine and maybe you're writing games, I recommend, just as you would if you were coding, to playtest every time you write some code, just to make sure that it's working, and you're not halfway through your story and you're not really sure if it's because of, and it's not working, and you're not sure if it's because like a variable at the very start isn't working, or one of the variables that you just wrote isn't working. So just playtest as often as you can as you play through.
Question?
Yes.
Is there a syntax code for, like, if I use the key on the door, I don't have the key anymore?
Yeah, so you could, I mean, if the door like eats the key.
It's gonna eat the key.
Yeah, so if the door is gonna eat the key, once you enter the secret room, what you could do is just, then you would set that variable to, I mean, maybe you want to keep track that it was eaten particularly, but you could just say false as well. And that's gonna reset that variable for you. Yeah,
Could you go back to the chest?
yes.
Oh, okay.
So I write in Twine fairly often. The Booleans can be uppercase or lowercase, but it is an open source free project, which is maintained basically by one person. So sometimes the code does get glitchy. And one of the common glitches that I found is Booleans not working if they're in a certain case. So that's always something to check as well. It just has to do with how it's coded, and it's coded by one person basically. So it's what we're working with.
Okay, that's something I have. When I put go back with start, it makes another option. It's not telling me, it's not showing me that I'm going back to the start.
It's creating a new passage.
Yeah.
Do you have a white space in any of your passage names? And also, is your capitalization correct?
I named the beginning the start. Wait.
Yeah, so make sure that this renamed start doesn't have like a hanging white space. So this passage name, just make sure there's no white space in it. And then when you're referring to it, make sure there's no space between the bar
Yeah.
and the S or at the end.
There was a white space word.
That's usually what it is. Yeah, because it's very, I mean, I do it all the time where I write something and I just click space and then hit enter. It's a thing that I do, so. Okay, that's variables. That's kind of very basic state tracking. That's how to create passages. There's a lot else you can do. There are lots of little like cool things. So maybe in the vase, there are things called cycling links. This is nice to give your players some kind of customization options within the game, so they get to kind of choose what things are, what they look like. So here we're going to create a cycling link. So that syntax again, parenthesis, cycling link. So cycling dash link, end it with a colon. And then we're going to give it 3 options of what is inside the vase. So it has, let's say, flowers. I don't know what else would be in a vase. Yeah, coins. Or we'll do dead flowers. And this will let our players choose what is in the vase. And if we test from here, that's how that works. So they can cycle through and kind of choose narratively how the passage reads. So they can kind of set their own tone. This is nice for if you want to give players a choice of like clothes or kind of style that they might have. Their feelings about a particular person, like lots of different kind of options that you can give them kind of the illusion of choice, even though the narrative is probably going to force them in one particular direction.
There's no way to keep it carried.
There is,
Okay.
which we will now do. So this cycling link doesn't create a variable from these choices. But if we wanted this choice to have a little bit more teeth to it, to have it matter a little bit more, we can use bind, which is a keyword in Twine. So bind, we'll just create a variable called vase. So bind vase, and that's going to bind this to one of these things. I'm wondering if these spaces matter, but I don't know. So we'll test from here and then we'll come back and move things around if we need to. Okay, it does not matter. So see, we've got flowers, and then in the bottom are variable updates. Yeah. So this would let you keep that variable and have it persist through the game. It's sometimes nice to have these persist and others of them not persist, because then your player is like, what does matter and what doesn't, right? So it's kind of that balance of how much choice you give players, but also like where the puzzles are, right? Because they need to figure that out on their own. So that's cycling link and binding those. I also want to show other ways of adding text, right? Because a lot of these games are exploring games. So ways that you can have text, but in ways that like entice players to play more or to read more. So let's stay in this passage. So we're going to create some kind of in-passage links that players might interact with. So we're going to use our link macro, which is just link and then our little colon. And we're gonna write some text that players might click on. And let's actually move this over here. And there are ways of messing with the white spaces and all of those kinds of things, so you can make things look nice. We're just being a bit haphazard right now. So we say go over to move it. We can turn this move it. So I'm going to move my link argument to in front of move it, because I want to turn move it into the text that we are going to click on. And I'm going to wrap that within the parentheses, so it's part of my argument. And then I'm going to add a hook to this. So right now, move it is going to appear as a link, so it's going to be blue text. And when the player clicks on it, the text that we're going to write within this bracket will replace the move it text. So let's test that. Right, so you go over, you click move it, it replaces the move it text. To make that work a little bit more narratively, we could replace move it here. We could also, instead of just using a link, like if we don't want the text, like if we don't want the text to just be replaced, instead of a plain link, we can use a link replace. And that's going to do kind of exactly what you think it will do. It's going, no, we want link reveal, never mind. Not with a capital A. Link reveal. So that's going to keep move it, but then add it on this text. So it's going to append the text to the end. So now when we hit move it, it drops on the floor and smashes the pieces, right? But now we need to kind of adjust our spacing and things like that. So just keeping in mind how the links will reveal text, and then you want to adjust it so it still makes sense for the player. We could also just get rid of that and test from here. This is also why it can take some play testing. Just to get kind of the narrative to work correctly. So this is really nice because, again, you can add passages within these passages. So if you want to do a link reveal and then this leads to the secret room somehow, you can do that. I don't know narratively how that would happen. It hits a brick and opens a secret door. Right, and then we can wrap that in here, add our pipe, and go to secret room. And now we've got the link between here, but we're not going to know that that exists until we click on that, and then we can go to that passage. So ways of hiding things within a Twine game, just to encourage exploration within it, are really nice. Something that's very similar to this is the click notation. See, if we're using links, things need to be all like smooshed together and next to each other. If you use the click notation, that lets you keep kind of your code separate. So it's a little easier to read. So if we had something that was like click, and we can refer to anything in the passage, so we could refer to smashes this way. But now we can keep this kind of code separate from our main narrative text. So it lets us kind of separate things. I find the difference between links and clicks really the preference of how you want to kind of organize your in-passage text and work with it. Sometimes you want to keep things a little bit looking cleaner and separated, and sometimes people don't care. So it's okay to have everything kind of all smooshed together. But if we test from here, we move it, we'll see that smashes is hyperlinked. And now there's a message on the floor is going to come down here. So then you also kind of have to plan ahead for where the text is going to appear to the person who's playing it, and making sure, again, that everything makes sense on their end. So those are the basic textual actions and some of getting into state tracking with variables. There's a lot more that you can do with it. There's a cheat sheet linked in the slides. So right at the end, this cheat sheet kind of goes through the main syntax components of things that you might want to test out. So there's passage links, variables, those kinds of things, cycling links, if else statements. You can use comparators. So if you're keeping track of, you have 5 apples and 4 potatoes because you're doing some kind of inventory management, you could do that. Line breaks, white spaces, if you want things to look nice. There are different kinds of state tracking that you can do in Twine. So you can do kind of checks to see if certain passages have been visited. So history checks. How many times the passage that a player is in has been visited. So if you want to reward players for going to the kitchen 5 times and then something new happens, you can do that. History checks, clicks and links. And then there's some styling information in here, and then some sort of how you create some timers and stuff like that.
Oh, I saw up there it said color, but with your UK spelling, does that matter?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it does.
I figured. It's
Yeah.
the one person.
Yeah. So we're almost to an hour. I would say, I mean, there's a lot more you can do with this, but it really depends on the kind of story that you might want to create. And I don't want to like sit here and like try and sell Twine to you in a way that's not like what you want to do. So I would say check out the Harlow documentation, check out the cheat sheet. If there's something that you want me to show on the screen, I'm happy to do that. Or if you've got like, well, I want to know how to do this thing, I can try and answer how to do that thing, but it kind of depends on what's being asked. But are there any questions or lingering thoughts or curiosities?
So how would you start to implement sound to this?
So for sound, if you're using the Harlow library specifically, there is a it's kind of like a plugin, but it's really just kind of a cheat code that you would put into your into the JavaScript. Oh, it's the Twine audio library. Twine audio library. Oh, Harlow audio library. Okay, so Harlow audio library. Like I said, there's one person who's mainly working on the Harlow fold libraries, but there are people who've created, they're kind of like plugins, right? They add a little bit of functionality that they're working with. So this is how you would do it. You would follow this documentation. But it's basically it's JavaScript that you would add into the JavaScript, and then there's some style sheet hacking as well. And then you can just load in the MP3s and play them. And this will you can add sound to basic Harlow, but it's only going to play in one passage, which is not very useful or interesting, right? You want it to persist. So this will let you have kind of persistent sound through your game.
Okay, good.
Yeah. It's easier to do in Sugar Cube, like this says, right? On par with Sugar Cube's audio subsystem. And I will say, if you do use Sugar Cube, the syntax is slightly different, but it's basically the same as what we've covered here. And it's not anything that's going to take you a lot to kind of figure out. If you are interested in using a different library, you would go to Twine and story formats and just choose the format that you want to use. Your Extra sheets are here, so your JavaScript is here if you want to write some custom JavaScript code, and your style sheet is here. Again, Twine, built by one person. They make odd decisions sometimes. So you'll want to really refer to the Twine cookbook to understand what CSS selectors exist in Harlow and how to use them. A lot of what I do is refer just like, so this design game, let me just play this. I just play it and then inspect and then try and figure out what these are, because things get nested in really bizarre ways sometimes as far as how these are created. So you'll see here, this is your Twine passage is the text. So, and then your Twine story is sort of the content box, or the allowed content box. And then there is a sidebar that you can add things to. And then they have links as Twine expressions. This is a problem because you'll see these are this is a particular object within Twine. This makes Twine games basically inaccessible to screen readers because they are not, for when you're working in Harlow specifically. Sugar Cube, it's just a straight up HTML link. So if you're working in Harlow, just be aware that the links are encoded in a completely different way than links anywhere else on the internet. And they're not going to be accessible via a screen reader, which is a really super great decision that was made.